That's right! Gaming service announcement! Do, 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 do. Kickstarter is now live and has been for a while.
For the Deck of Contradiction.
For the Deck of Contradiction.
By Old Warlock Games.
By Old Warlock Games. The link is down in the description below. Go click on it. Go check it out. That's all we ask, that you at least go just give a glance, see if it's something you would be interested in.
We think you will.
We think you'll like it. It's a supplement we created. We're very, very excited about it, but we know that's also not why you're here. So go click the link down below. We think you'll enjoy it.
After watching this fascinating video on invisibility.
Yes. To the video. So, do you guys remember when you were kids and people
I don't.
said that you should be seen and not heard? Today, we're going to be talking about the inverse of that, where you can be heard but not seen. That's right. We're talking about the invisibility spell.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we're doing.
Woo! Wow, what's that? He's gone.
No, I'm here.
He's here?
I'm here, yes.
Thanks to the invisibility spell.
Which is something that I mastered a long time ago, and I think that it gives me some authority to talk about the invisibility spell itself and how it should operate.
Boy, I should say so.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let's just have a little look at the history of the invisibility spell, and then we will talk about a really interesting article that I found in Polyhedron number 3, which came out back in 81-82, the winter of 81-82, where they discuss specifically the spell of invisibility in early Dungeons and Dragons.
Sounds good to me.
All right. Here, let me get comfortable.
Yeah. Oh, do you feel better?
Much better. That's
good. I'm glad.
We're good to go. So we're going to start by taking a quick look at. This really cracks you up, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We're going to take a quick look at the history of the invisibility spell itself. Now, the earliest mention of an invisibility spell for magic users goes clear back to chainmail, which was the thing that was used to develop the very early manifestations of Dungeons and Dragons.
Very early predecessor.
And in that early chainmail guide, it was actually a way to play medieval war games with miniatures. But there was for those of you who don't know, there was a fantasy supplement, if you will, in chainmail that allowed you to have things happen in your medieval miniatures warfare that involved dragons and spells and things like that. And that's some people argue that that's really where some of those early ideas for Dungeons and Dragons came from. But that's neither here nor there. The only reason I bring it up is that in chainmail, there was a mention that magic users could turn themselves invisible whenever they wanted to. There's no spell involved. They just would become invisible. So that's kind of the earliest mention, but it really wasn't considered a spell. It was just something that magic users or wizards had the ability to do. Now, if you'll pick up that other magazine there, the Men in Magic.
This one?
Yeah, that one there.
Fantastic.
Yeah. This is out of the original D&D series. And this is the first place that there's actually a spell mentioned for invisibility.
And it's very brief, actually.
Very brief.
It's listed as a 3rd level spell. And it says, getting comfy? Can you see okay?
Yeah, that's better. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. Invisibility, 10-foot radius. An invisibility spell with an extended projection, but otherwise no different from the former spell. That's not right. Let's go back and read the earlier one that they're referring to.
Show it to me real quick.
That one there is what it should be?
Yeah, that's the one.
Of course. Okay. Invisibility. A spell which lasts until it is broken by the user or by some outside force. Remember that as in chainmail, a character cannot remain invisible and attack. It affects only the person or thing upon whom or which it is cast. Range, 24 feet. 24 yards? Meters? Is it the same in this one?
It will be 24 inches.
24 inches, yeah. Range 24 inches.
So it depends on whether indoors or outdoors. That translates into feet or yards.
Of course, yes. Sorry about that. But yeah, and I like how it references chainmail here. So you're saying kind of this causality. There are steps that are being taken in the development of this thing we kind of take for granted now.
Right, and the reason that I think they mention it in here is that in chainmail, if a wizard took an offensive action, he would become visible.
Yeah.
And that's something that has carried on all the way through.
Yes, which has been a constant.
But now let's read the player's handbook.
The AD&D player's handbook?
Yes.
This one here? Is this what you mean? Yeah?
Yeah, that's the one.
Fantastic. Okay. Invisibility under second level magic user spells. Explanation or description. This spell causes the recipient to vanish from sight and not be detectable by normal vision or even infravision. Of course, the visible creature is not magically silenced with respect to noises normal to it. The spell remains in effect until it is magically broken or dispelled, or the magic user or the other recipient cancels it, or until he, she, or it attacks any creature. There you go again. Thus, the spellcaster or recipient could open doors, talk, eat, climb stairs, etc., but if any form of attack is made, the invisible creature immediately becomes visible, although this will allow the first attack by the creature because of the former invisibility. Even the allies of the spell recipient cannot see the invisible creature, or his, her, or its gear, unless these allies can normally see invisible things or employ magic to do so. Note that all highly intelligent creatures with 10 or more hit dice or levels of experience, or the equivalent in intelligence / dice / levels, have a chance to automatically detect invisible objects. The material components of this invisibility spell are an eyelash and a bit of gum arabic, the former encased in the latter.
So there's still some room for interpretation in that spell, as there are so many areas where you need to do some interpretation in the early D&D, which actually I really like.
I think it's fun.
I don't like having things specifically spelled out. You must do it this way.
Yeah.
Invisibility is a really good part of that. Now, getting back to the Polyhedron magazine from the winter of 81-82, they go into, they really kind of approach the invisibility spell in depth. Bear along with us here as we read through some of this, and then really at the end of the day, we'd like to know how you have dealt with invisibility in your campaign.
Yes.
We have followed some of the same things that they do in this article from Polyhedron. We have done things slightly differently in some areas too. Let us know what you've done. But
yes,
let's get started with the article. They started by saying this issue we're going to examine is invisibility. It occurs as the second level magic user, an illusionist spell, invisibility, and the third level spells of invisibility, 10-foot radius, fourth level illusionist spell, improved invisibility, potion of invisibility, etc., etc. They say invisibility is one of the most misunderstood and misused of all spells, and thus is the topic in this first column of its type, meaning investigation of spells. The descriptions are relatively accurate, but can be a bit hard to understand fully. And I'm going to have to agree with that.
Sure.
So they use a person that they have named Felonius as the example magic user, to kind of give you some idea of the things that Felonius might run into, that someone might run into if they were going to cast the invisibility spell. So let's say that Felonius gets out his gum and eyelash, which is the material part of the spells. He gets out his gum and eyelash and starts saying the magic words, moving his hands in the proper motions because the components are verbal, somatic, and material. 12 seconds later, 2 segments, he disappears. Everything he was carrying at the finish of the spell disappears with him. He can now cast defensive and miscellaneous spells, move, etc., without popping back into sight. He can pop in whenever he wants to, of course, but because no other spells are necessary to break the invisibility. Everything seems pretty good at that point.
Pretty straightforward, not too complicated.
Of course, if anything distracts Felonius while he is casting the spell will not take place in the first place. Distractions include any damage to him, failing to make his saving throw versus any attack form, and being roughly moved even if no damage results. Thus, if a fellow party member bumps into him during the casting, well, that's going to mess up the spell. Now, usually in D&D, that kind of was just the end of it. Oh, your spell didn't work. We would go to the Magic Mayhem table that we use to find out what would happen, if anything, to Felonius when he tried to cast this spell and had a problem. Just makes things a little more fun.
Well, I don't know about fun. Seems like a strong word.
I'm sticking with fun. Anyway, the next question, though, in this article is, so what happens to the items Felonius is carrying? And I think this is where a lot of things fall down for the use of the invisibility spell. The term given in the spell description is gear. So, and the area of effect is creature touched. Therefore, if Felonius is carrying 800 pounds of treasure and can barely stand, all of that treasure disappears with him when he makes himself disappear, because he is the target creature. But if he has his familiar with him, which it might be something as simple as a toad on his shoulder, sitting on his shoulder, the toad will not disappear. It is a separate creature, and it is not gear. You would have to cast the invisibility spell on the toad as a separate spell in order to make him disappear too. So the next thing we get into is we have to make some deductions based on what the spell implies, not necessarily what it says. If an item is made invisible as gear, it will remain invisible when it is put down. There will be problems with this. You could basically gather up a bunch of things saying that it's your gear. So maybe you have a bunch of caltrops that are poisoned. You could end up gathering them up. You could cast invisibility on yourself, and all of your invisible poisoned caltrops would also be all of your poisoned caltrops would also be invisible, and you could scatter those around on the floor, and no one would be the wiser until they stepped on one.
Great in theory, right?
Great in theory. The problem with this is that, well, I guess it's not necessarily a problem, but there are a couple of ways as a dungeon master that I would deal with this. First off, straight up, you could say anything that you are no longer in contact with. So if you take one of your poisoned caltrops and you set it on the floor, maybe that breaks the spell.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the cheap way out. I would rather have it be that if you put that caltrop down, no one knows where it is, including the person who cast it.
That would be the big one.
And over time, you're going to be able to see that caltrop because dust will accumulate on it. There are just a lot of different ways that you could mitigate these invisible objects rather than just saying, as soon as you stop touching it, it's no longer invisible.
Yeah.
But that takes us to another issue. Some people, and I think this is the biggest issue, a lot of people have always believed that if you turn invisible and then you pick up an object later on, and then you put it in your cloak, which is invisible, you can no longer see the object you just picked up. And that is not the case.
Yes.
Because it was not something that you had as one of your pieces of gear when you cast the invisibility spell on yourself.
Yeah.
So all you're doing is you're picking up the baseball-sized ruby, and what you have then is a baseball-sized ruby floating around in midair because you, as an invisible person, are carrying it, but that doesn't transfer your invisibility to the ruby.
Granted, this is not necessarily a be-all, end-all for your hopes of being an invisible thief. I think there are ways you could circumvent your way around this problem, but we can get to those here in a minute.
So, can you pick up things, and does it make everything that you hide inside your invisible cloak invisible? No, it does not. Now, you've also got to move on to, in order to fully investigate this spell, you have to look at the invisibility 10-foot radius spells, which works in a very similar way. Let's read through this. At the finish of the spell, every creature within 10 feet of the caster disappears along with the gear carried by each of them. This does not set up a power field of invisibility that you disappear in when you step into it and you reappear when you leave that 10-foot field. It is just imbuing all of the people inside of that circle with invisibility. Now, as the spell description says, those affected creatures which attack negate the invisibility only with respect to themselves, not others who have also been made invisible. So, and I think that that's kind of a standard thing. And if you want to, you can make yourself uninvisible. If you are the recipient of the spell, you don't have to be the spellcaster to have that
of course
that disappear.
Sure.
But how do we deal with all this kind of stuff in terms of say you had your magic user and you wanted them to be invisible for 5 days' time. Mm-hmm. I don't think that this is going to be a possibility, because anytime you ate something, for example, you would be able to see it go into the person's body, because the food is not invisible.
Yeah.
And your body is not there to block sight of it. Mm-hmm. Consequently,
you'll be able to see it.
you're going to be able to see it. And with time, what's going to happen? Let's say you ate an apple after you cast invisibility on yourself. As you digested that apple, which would be a gross thing to see in the first place, the nutrients from that apple are going to make their way through you. And pretty soon you're going to be appearing as kind of a grainy, hazy outline as the nutrients of the apple, which are still visible,
disseminate through you.
Exactly. To me, that's one of the things that needs to, I think that concept needs to be in place in order to keep invisibility from getting out of hand.
Yes. And invisibility in our campaign has always been viewed as one of those things. It's like, we view it similarly that we do flight, in that it's an extremely powerful thing that does have to have some sort of limit placed on it. You know, as much fun as I think it would be for a little while to be an invisible thief that sneaks through castles and steals all kinds of stuff, when you pick up the diamonds, they become invisible and they go into your bag, and then you can sneak away and nobody's going to be any the wiser. I think that, kind of like I alluded to earlier, if you are picking up the baseball-sized ruby before you leave the castle, and then you have to figure out ways to hide that as you're sneaking through, even if you're invisible, putting it behind something, or making sure that you have, say, like a bag of holding, so you can put it into a different plane of existence while you're making your way through. Having to think through some of these things as you are planning ahead of time, I think that just makes the game more interesting. And it does allow invisibility to be a tool, but like you said, it's not the be-all, end-all for everything.
Right, and I think that's a very good idea, though. Having that planning ahead thing is the fun part.
Well, we talk about that a lot in these videos. That's something that we enjoy in our campaign and makes the game more real and more involved. And we think everybody should try it in some capacity.
Well, and there are other ways to mitigate this whole thing as well. And I think that this is where the creativity on the part of the dungeon master comes from. Mm-hmm. One of the things that you would need to keep in mind if you were going through a dusty dungeon and you were raising clouds of dust, and you were invisible, well, that dust that was not made invisible when you cast the spell is going to cover you. You're still physically there.
Yeah.
That dust is going to cover you, and it's going to make you visible.
Yeah.
Mud on your boots. There are just a lot of different ways to make invisibility not be such a powerful spell. I think it's great to have it as a powerful spell for a little while, but then you've got to figure out a way to tone it down.
And it's still, like you said, it still can be a very powerful spell, but I don't think it's a bad thing to have limits placed upon it. Again, I think it just makes the game a little bit more interesting. And that like I said earlier, you have to think through things a little bit more, and that just makes it fun.
Right. I agree with that. I agree with that completely.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's all I really wanted to say. I was reading through this Polyhedron magazine, which is a great magazine, by the way. If you really like to get into the heads of the people who were developing D&D early on, this is the way to do it. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of fun to read, and when I came across this, I thought, we've had some issues with invisibility ourselves.
We have.
And, people interpreting it different ways. How about we do a video about it? But let us know what you do with invisibility. Do you allow it to be a really powerful spell, or do you place limits on it?
Yeah.
Maybe you can give us some ideas that we can incorporate into the way that we deal with invisibility in our AD&D system.
Yes. So yes, share all of your experiences down below. We would absolutely love to hear about them. In the meantime, go check out our Kickstarter down below. That's still going on for the Deck of Contradiction, our new supplement we put together. So please go click the link down below for that. To our Patreon members, thank all of you so much. You guys are the best. If you're interested in joining our Patreon, the link for that is down in the description below as well. If not, no worries. Don't fret about it. But to all of our Patreon members, our patrons, if you will, thank you all so much. We really do appreciate it.
Exactly.
So, without further ado,
I'm Jim.
I'm Alex.
Keep your sword arm free.
Bye-bye.